All right, guys. This is going to be a solo stream. I wanted to still carry on the idea of doing something around the greats, going through the greats on a Sunday. So I'm going to go into Plutarch rather than keep on the tradition that I'm going with Rashid, which is to go through Emerson and Carlyle. We're going to go back to Plutarch's Parallel Lives and start from the very start, which is Theseus and Romulus, and look at those two, see what we can pick out. So I've just got some slides. I think that's the best setup. I've got some slides just to have some visuals as I talk through the work. And I suppose the place to start with Theseus is his uncertain parentage, which Plutarch also links with Romulus, how they both emerged from the chaos of this Bronze Age or Dark Age from their respective civilizations. Hence, really, we're dealing with warriors. That's what Plutarch wants to start off with. He wants to start off with warriors. So his first grasp at greatness in these parallel lives is about people with physical strength, people who want to be builders, truly builders who come from 0 to 1, if you think of the Peter Thiel concept. And Theseus is brought up by his grandfather, Pirithous, who's a sort of a mentor figure to him. Well known, sort of the wise absorption of the young person is key to Theseus's molding. And if we think of his main attributes, we've got 4 attributes for Theseus. They're his strength of body, his equal bravery, his quickness, and his force of understanding. So really, you need the strength of the body. It needs to be coupled with that equal bravery so you can put yourself into situations that the normal person wouldn't really find themselves in, who may still be of great physical strength. The quickness is alluding again in that Greek sort of pantheon of the mythos where Hercules starts with a club. Hercules is a very sort of brutish, fundamental hero, and Theseus's life overlaps with Hercules, but then we're getting towards Achilles of the myths, who's a quick-footed Achilles, who kind of quickness and speed and agility become more to the forefront of attributes of greatness. But Theseus still kind of mold between the two, I think. So fired by the glories of Hercules, he sets out in his own quests. He used a club as Hercules did, and this kind of alludes to me when I'm thinking we need to take out what Plutarch's talking about greats and whether there's certain themes and overlapping attributes. The idealization, even his first hero, which is Theseus, has his own ideal hero from which to first replicate himself by. So that's Hercules. He takes the club from him. He's fired by the glory, in the words of Plutarch. Greatness then starts with mimicry, and then eventually you add your own tale to the telling. And also in that sort of spiritual journey, you're often linked with a physical journey. Plutarch talks about the journey to Athens of Theseus. So like a rite of passage, he kind of goes on this journey by land. The easy route was by sea, and he chose to go through the tougher route, and he goes through these series of labors when he's on these routes. Arrives at Athens, and Athens is kind of undergoing a humiliation. But let's see if there's any imagery there which can concoct this into people's minds. So I started here with Boccaccio's Theseid. Again, if you're going through the classical tradition, you would have seen that Boccaccio wrote a Theseid in the Middle Ages, in which he was trying to make Theseus's life something that would be done similar to how Virgil had done Aeneas in the Aeneid. So here's Paulo de Viso's 15th century depictions. These are little panels from the tale of that Theseid, Boccaccio's Theseid. So this journey is labor and his travels to Athens are included in that. This is an early work, or this is a work by Poussin of the early life of Theseus. He collaborated with Paulo de Viso, who we saw earlier. So scenes from Boccaccio's Theseid. This is the Poussin work, though, and it's Theseus recovering his father's sword. You can see he's lifting up this rock. It's an early demonstration of his strength, and there's his mother, Aethra, next to him. just an early indication that he was blessed. I think it's possible, yes, he thought he was son of Aegeus, who was the actual king of Athens, but there's also rumors, of course, that he can trace his line all the way back to Theseus, the pure deification of, those early inhabitants of Attica, from which you get Athens. So think of, just as Romulus kind of had Aeneas even before him, Theseus has Theseus even before him. We get the Erechtheion, which is the temple that's on the Acropolis. So there's rumors that his ancestry is still bound up in that. But the travel to Athens and the labors he undergo are related to his ancestry in relation to Aegeus. Now, when he arrives there, there's this whole scene of recognition, which we see here. They liked, artists of the Renaissance and into the 19th century liked doing these sort of scenes, I found, just by sort of browsing around as what's available, rather than, I didn't find much. Like, you could see sketches on the 6 labors that he undergoes. Again, that's kind of an allusion to Hercules' 7 labors. So physical strength and the demonstration of it, very important in the foremost of Theseus' life. But when he goes to Athens, we see a sort of different development to the Theseus myth. Athens is undergoing humiliation. Every 9 years, it has to give a tribute to Minos, where 7 young men and many virgins, I believe, go and are basically sacrificed to the Minotaur. And this is where the story of the Minotaur comes in. And Theseus is more, just as he kind of takes on this is a depiction of these sort of tributes that we're talking about. Just as Theseus begins to take on a sort of more morphed idea of the hero than just Hercules and conducting these labors, he grapples literally with a Minotaur who's this mixture of between bull and man, and he has to overcome it. So when they're navigating the labyrinth as well, obviously can be seen as sort of a metaphor for navigating certain aspects of life. And Theseus is up to this task. That's what a hero does. He's able to navigate that which others are not able to navigate. In Deeds, Aristotle claims the tributes were tormented by the Minotaur, but spent their days in slavery in Crete, more or less. So there, Aristotle trying to add some, as Plutarch does throughout, actually, tries to add some more sort of practicalities to the myth rather than absorbing it as pure mythos. Let's just take this time then to read some direct passages from Plutarch. I said that both of them, this is when he's giving his introduction of why did I choose Theseus and Romulus, both of them, says Plutarch, were born out of wedlock and of uncertain parentage and had the repute of being sprung from the gods. That is, sort of sprung from the gods, but also of uncertain parentage for me reminds me of the chaos, right? They're coming from the chaos of Bronze Age or Dark Age for these civilizations. Both warriors that by all the world allowed, both of them united with the strength of an equal vigor of mind, and of 2 most famous cities of the world, the one built Rome, the other made Athens be inhabited. Again, that's 0 to 1. Both stand charged with the rape of women. We'll get to that later. These are sort of idea of the primitive understanding of that word. The lineage of Theseus by his father's side ascends as high as Erechtheus, and the first inhabitants of Attica by his mother's side, he was descended by Pelops. Theseus is displaying not only great strength of body, but equal bravery and a quickness alike. And those are the attributes I decided to highlight. That age produced sort of men in force of hand and swiftness of foot and strength of body, excelling at the ordinary rate, wholly incapable of fatigue, making use, however, of these gifts of nature to no good profitable purpose for mankind, but rejoicing and priding themselves in insolence and making the benefit of their superior strength in the exercise of inhumanity and cruelty. So, is Theseus going to follow in that mold, or is he going to do something that goes above and beyond simply having strength and having those physical attributes that can put him in the pantheon of a hero? Let's look at how he tackles the Minotaur then, because this is the first bit really where there's a theme of sacrifice here. He volunteers himself to go up with this lot. So usually the people of Athens, the young men of Athens, were taken in by lot. But Theseus actually volunteers to go to the labyrinth and face his destiny. Something to remind ourselves when we talk about Romulus. Romulus much more the these early parts of his life are being acted upon him as a sort of sense of destiny, rather than Theseus going out seeking it. Here he seeks. He doesn't wait to be drawn by lot. You could have a tale where Theseus is drawn by lot and then goes on to his adventures. Not so here. He decides that he will go upon it himself. So again, active, not passive, which is again sort of Carlylean trait in the hero. Key difference to say, think about even Luke Skywalker, right? That's a sort of more passive thing. A lot of things fall upon him. He just happens to visit Uncle Ben. If you're just thinking of a 20th century version of the sort of hero myth. We also need to be struck by the nobleness of Theseus. And we have a passage here that, think of Andrea, the Greek word Andrea. These things sensibly affected Theseus, who thinking it but just not to disregard, but rather partake of the sufferings of his fellow citizens, offered himself for one without any lot. All these were struck with admiration for the nobleness and with love for the goodness of the act. So we have the endearment to fellow citizens as well as the action. Theseus, encouraging his father and speaking greatly of himself as confident that he should kill the Minotaur, gave the pilot another sail, which was white, commanding him as he returned, if Theseus were safe, to make use of that, but if not, to sail with the black one and to hang out that sign of his misfortune. Simonides, the poet, says that the sail which Aegeus delivered to the pilot was not white, but scarlet, in the juicy bloom of the living oak tree steeped, and that this was to be the sign of their escape. There's a whole sort of mythos about when he returns, he gives the wrong sail, and then that causes Aegeus' death because he despairs that his son did not return, thus creating the vacuum for Theseus to go in and be king without the muddling of a hero's journey that, what happened to Aegeus, he just happens to comfortably move aside. So the sail color is a sort of way that in the myth making, they can extricate Theseus from any cause in Aegeus' death. He went to the Delphinium and made an offering for them to Apollo of his suppliant's badge. And when I was reading Plutarch, and this is the Plutarch I have, it's pretty much the classic. It's the modern library, John Dryden translation, but edited by Arthur Hugh Clough in the 19th century. Pretty much unchanged since then. So he makes these sacrifices to Apollo all the time. He went to the Delphinium before he goes to face the Minotaur. And I noticed similar stuff in Romulus. This supplication to the gods is still very important in these early tales. Even though they've got raw strength, they themselves are seen as demigods. The supplication is important. Before those, you still know when there are the gods above you. When he arrived at Crete, as most of the ancient historians as well, poets tell us, having a clue of thread given him by Ariadne, who has fallen in love with him. So again, everyone sort of falls in love with you as the hero. He's starting to create this gravity around him. Now things are beginning he volunteers for the lot, but now with Ariadne, things start coming into him. Ariadne aids him. After falling in love with him, the gravity of greatness sort of propels its own myth on. And this is why it begins to create something that is more, think of the perpetual motion machine. If you achieve that level of greatness, or it's more like, it's kind of like a critical mass. Once you achieve the critical mass of everyone talking about you, then you no longer even need to be particularly active. The action starts to come to you. He has, of course, success in slaying the Minotaur. I think I've got some of the works here. This is Charles-Edouard Chasse. The Minotaur, it's kind of darkened out there, but it's there in the bottom right. Him displaying that he has vanquished the Minotaur. He uses Ariadne's thread to get back out. I think we're quite familiar with that part of the myth. So, again, he sort of releases, there's a barter with the king of Minos, or Minos is the king, of Crete. And he gives him up once Theseus has beat his captain Taurus. So he still needs to kind of beat a physical human, Taurus. And Minos wasn't willing to give up any sort of power or Ariadne as his prize that easily. Once he's released as well, I noticed in Plutarch, Theseus is immediately planning a naval enlargement and sort of expansion of his forces. So he knows that though he gets released by Minos, this guy isn't necessarily going to keep his word. That's another good attribute of a leader, that he's not so, there's a bit of the Machiavellian there. He's not just going to go back and go, well, he gave me his word, and now we're sort of allies. The myth doesn't really take that telling. There's inconsistency over the fate of Ariadne. Does he leave her on an island? I think Naxos is the island. Does he make a league with her as she stays leader of Crete? Plutarch says there's these different sources on that. Does he have any children by her? Because then there's a lot of stuff about his second wife, Phaedra. That's where you get the tragedy, Seneca's Phaedra, or then Racine does it later in the Baroque era in France. Phaedra and Hippolyta, or Hippolytus. Hippolytus is Theseus' son then by the Amazons, because now also think about Ariadne came in to the gravity of the greatness that Theseus created. There's also going to be the rivalries. Because once he goes back, he has set up and becomes leader of a genuine Athens. And he sets up rivalries, one of them the Amazons. And then that's another episode. Plutarch spends a little bit on it, but not much. Theseus then has a son by Hippolyta called Hippolytus. And then this creates a later tragedy with his second wife, Phaedra, who thinks that Hippolytus, I think she fall in love with Hippolytus, and there's meddlings of the gods. It's because Hippolytus said he preferred Artemis to Aphrodite. But the death of Aegeus was, as we said with the sail, was inhibited him to become the leader, and he creates the Commonwealth. And I wanted to take apart bits of when he was actually the leader. What did he actually do? And according to the mythos, Plutarch says that he divides it into ranks. These three ranks being of equality: noblemen, husbandmen, and artificers. The artificers had the greatest number. Husbandmen had the greatest profit, and the noblemen had the greatest care of religion and the choice of magistracy and the law and leaning. And this was the balance. So this is very interesting. When you think of Plutarch, literally calls this an equality. The nobility he committed, the care of religion, the choices of magistrates, the teaching of the dispensing of laws, and interpretation and direction in all sacred matters. Holy city being, as it were, reduced to an exact equality. The nobles excelling in the rest in honor, husbandmen in profit, and the artificers in number. So it's not democracy, but it is still appealing to that word, equality. I thought that was quite interesting. There's other escapades he then goes on. He's got, did he join Jason to Calchas, possibly, on the slaying of the Caledonian boar? This is the adventure of the Argonauts, in which we get the saying, not without Theseus, because he had to be there. This, again, he becomes so large himself that he begins to insert himself into other myths. And I think he's being put into Euripides, he's being put into different tellings constantly now. Theseus and then Pirithous went together to get to Sparta and to try and get Helen. This is the beginning of his downfall, because he sides with this younger version, Pithios, or Pirithous, who's his friend, but he's his younger version who still wants to do all of these things, like, oh, let's go out and let's take Helen from Sparta. And then that's who Theseus says he's happy to have as his bride, or his prize, because they still want to go out and take these women. Again, this is something similar to Romulus. It's going to come in later. But Pirithous says, no, I'm going to have Persephone, who's the wife of Hades. So because he's younger, he goes with the more adventurous one. And then while Theseus is helping Pirithous go all the way into the underworld, excuse me, just getting nonsense from Siri. When Theseus is gone out with Pirithous, I think we see him leave Athens. And this is the bit with the greatness that jars with me, is why does he go to the underworld when he's got a city to govern? He still wants to be too young. Here's a bit on the Hippolytus and Phaedra take. I suggest to look into Seneca's Phaedra for the good telling of that tragedy. And then we have the absence of Theseus, which is what I'm getting at now. He goes with Pirithous to the underworld. Why would you leave Athens? You've created this sense of equality, and then you go and create a vacuum. And people like Castor and Pollux here go fetch Helen and return her to Sparta and create basically a war between Sparta and Theseus's fledgling Athens. So whilst he was thus buried and infected in the minds of the citizens, the war that Castor and Pollux brought against Athens came very opportunely, says Plutarch. This their desire easily obtained. They were adopted by Athens as Heracles had been by Peleus. They were honored also like gods and were called by a new name, Anaches, either from the cessation of the war or from the care that took none should suffer injury. Some say Aethra, Theseus' mother, were taken prisoner along with Helen of Troy to Lacedaemon. And Hercules was much grieved for the inglorious death of the one and the miserable condition of the other. When Hercules goes to the underworld to find basically why has the absence of Theseus lasted so long, it's because Theseus is stuck on a rock, pestered by the Furies, frozen by the gods or by Hades, and Ketibus has devoured Pirithous, trying to get Persephone out from the underworld is just hubris. So there are actions that are too great for even those who share the attributes that we stated earlier. The dexterity, the physical strength, the intelligence of mind. He's lacking the intelligence here by going to the underworld. What happened earlier before the labyrinth? There was supplication to the gods. Now there's no supplication, there's hubris. So Pirithous is devoured by Ketibus and Theseus is frozen. Hercules then manages to negotiate for the release of Theseus, and he goes back to find that the likes of Castor and Pollux here have taken back Helen, and he has lost much of what he has made in Athens. Theseus therefore addressed himself to him. Eventually goes to Lycodemus, king of Scuros, when he's trying to get his lands back. Desire to have his lands put up into his possession, as designing to settle and to dwell there. Though others say that he came to beg his assistance against Athenians who had turned against him. One of the interesting things I noted as well was that when Theseus is away, Menestheus is this guy who opens the gates for Castor and Pollux. He's this sort of young usurper to the Athenian throne in the absence of true greatness. And their only grievance being with Theseus and not Athens, Castor and Pollux don't actually ruin the entire city. And that for me was a crucial point in Plutarch. When you say, we have no gripe with you, only with Theseus, the idea of Theseus as doing the 0 to 1 and making Athens and being associated with Athens has ceased. You can extricate the hero from the city or from the polis that he had grown to encompass. And then that dislocation is the beginning of the end of the hero, right? He becomes only a man again, not the myth that he has built. So Athens is basically Theseus. It's the part of the myth that he has created. By separating them, turning the Athenians against Theseus as a leader is the beginning of his downfall. And really it's all because of that hubris, siding with Pirithous and wanting to go to the underworld, forgetting about his supplications to the gods. So I think he meets his end on Skyros, which is the island. Lycomedes, the king, says, no, you're not going to side with me, not going to have your lands back. And there is an ending to Theseus. So, knowing that he's a demigod, though, Theseus does come back. I think there was rumors that he was seen in Marathon. There was rumors that he, the battle against the Medes. And so any soldiers who believe they saw the apparition of Theseus in arms got injected with this sort of strength and belief that they could continue. So he lies interned in the middle of the city in the Athenians at the time of Plutarch, at least, and his tomb is a sanctuary and refuge for slaves and for all those who mean the condition that fly from persecution of men in power. This was a sort of strange thing which seemed to have happened by Plutarch's time, that slaves liked to go to the shrine of Theseus. I assume it was associated with how there was rumors that those who went to Crete to join the labyrinth were slaves. And so they thought that, it became sort of freer of slaves. It's an interesting way that the myth began to spin and change. But let's move on to Romulus. Romulus is best believed the source of building Rome, of course. And actually, Plutarch started with Romulus and then worked back and said, okay, who can I actually team Romulus up with? Because I'm doing my parallel live series. And then he kind of gets to do Theseus, but he's struggling more. Romulus is the one he wants to start with. It's like where man and myth really combine in. And Plutarch, though, being of Greek extraction, is writing in an entirely Roman world, 1st century AD. 2nd century AD, I think. So when he's doing Romulus, he's very concerned with much more the idea of how he was building Rome and how the consecration of Rome. When he starts with the myth, again, there's a bit of a blurring of the lines of the heritage, because though he's brought up by the farmer Faustulus, and that's where he's found here. You can see Faustulus bringing Romulus and Remus. He's the one who finds them having been reared by wolves. The mother of Romulus was Rhea, and she was with child. And though she was it Numitor's son, or was it Amulius? Was it Mars? Because Numitor is the guy who has the inheritance of Alba. Right, he is the king of Alba, or should be the king of Alba. Numitor should be, but Amulius is his brother and wants to be. So there's a usurpation thing happening in the generation above Romulus and Remus. And so out of fear that Amulius will find these sons who are going to be Numitor's sons, have a claim to the throne of Alba, she sends them down the river in a basket, sort of thing. And they wind up getting reared by wolves. Then this farmer Faustulus finds them. But there's also rumors that it's actually their father is Mars themselves. So it's a bit of a strange one. We're still kind of playing with the gods, but we're also playing with this idea of greatness and lineage and descendants and the right to inherit. Again, I think there was a take that Amulius takes the kingdom from Numitor, but Amulius has money and sources. Again, it remains kind of obscure, but Numitor has rights. So there's still an emphasis in these old myths that those who have the right to rule are the heroes, not just the newcomer who has money. And I've talked a little bit about this in my series on morality and depravity in England, where the new class is the money class. We're making the money through the Industrial Revolution, and the old class are the landed aristocracy who have things like the corn laws are seen as a preservance of the old class. So, though usually that's told in a way that the new money are the more respectable of the two, who have they're the progressives. But here in the old myths, it's actually Numitor that we side with, not Amulius. We side with the guy who was meant to be born in it, the right of it. I think if anyone watched Game of Thrones or read those series, that it was like those people who agreed that Stannis should have been the king because he's the one who had the rights. So I thought that was an interesting take. And then we look at the traits. So Romulus seemed rather to act by counsel and to show the sagacity of a statesman, says Plutarch, born to rule rather than to obey. Remus is taken, meanwhile, I think he's seen and recognized and brought before Amulius, while Romulus was attending a sacrifice. So again, we have Romulus being the one more ready for counsel, which I think Theseus wasn't really ready for at this stage. So Romulus is the one who's ready for counsel, and Remus is the one who gets abducted. So you can already see which of the two is going to be the more natural leader there. And also it's notable that Romulus in the tale is attending a sort of sacrifice to the gods. So there's a great piety there. I'm not sure exactly what Remus was doing, but anyway, he's offered to Numitor, Amulius' brother, and then Remus raises suspicion about their parentage, that they're not just Faustulus, this farmer's sons. Remus rousing the citizens and within to revolt, and Romulus making attacks from without. The tyrant, not knowing what to do, was taken and put to death. So obviously the situation wasn't stable to begin with the Amulius. So it was quite easy. All you needed was Romulus and Remus to be, maybe they are the real descendants. And then you have the two turmoils. Romulus is inside the walls, inside the court. He can begin to foster resentment from within. Romulus can do it from without. And between the two, the whole thing disintegrates. for Amulius. So then I think that within and without is actually quite crucial there to, when you talk about revolutions, you need that element from within. So Romulus going back into the court, it's actually, for me, I think something quite crucial. So then they sort of leave, though, to found a new city. This is the response from the revolt from within. I was a bit vague on this. Like, why would they go? They obviously need to go and found Rome. That's the myth. But if you're trying to think of the logic of the characters here, why don't they just become rulers or in line for the throne of Alba? Instead, they need to go and create a city. And I think that's why Plutarch liked that. It's the 0 to 1 element. I think also I was just postulating here, was it a response from the revolt from within? You know, you've just had a revolution. Do you trust the court? Romulus, as being someone of greatness, says, no, I'm not just going to inherit this court. I'm going to found my own. So their mind being full bent upon building. Again, we said that building was crucial. Mind being full bent upon building, there arose presently a difference about the place. Men of action. Roman divination of birds then originated from the vulture, takes the telling of Romulus and Remus. There was this bit about where they settle each land, where to build this new place, and then Romulus sort of deceives Remus through divination, where the bird gives, oh, the bird told me this thing. And he sort of manipulates the divination to get his own results, whereas Remus doesn't. And I was thinking about that as an early indication of soft power. He knows, think of Carlyle always seen through quackery. Romulus kind of knows divination is a great tool. And I spoke last week with Rashid on the mystic, how the mystic differs to the philosopher. The mystic gives genuine advice and portents about a battle or an omen of whether you do this or that on a certain date. He's much more active and involved in rulemaking than a philosopher who's going to found his own academy aloof like Plato, or even just scrutinize everything like Socrates. And Romulus here is showing that actually he's not going to be led by any mystic or any parts of the divination. He's going to be the ruler himself. And now we get the beginning of the Remus resentment, because Romulus, as Plutarch said, has always been told that he's the more natural ruler, born to rule rather than to obey, in Plutarch's words. But Remus is a different foe to Menestheus. Remember, when Theseus leaves Athens, it's Menestheus who fills the vacuum originally and opens then the gates to Castor and Pollux for the ruination sort of Athens there. And there's also a great hubris in why Theseus was even absent. Remus here is resentful of Romulus, but Romulus is still a rising star. He hasn't properly built Rome yet. He's not going anywhere. He's literally building the place. It's the absence of Theseus that created the vacuum for a person like Menestheus, who's actually a bit more weak. Faustulus is killed in a scuffle, though, nonetheless, which is sort of caused by this hatred, these feuding factions, the Remus faction and the Romulus faction. And I was thinking of what Romulus has to deal with here is quite different to Theseus. Theseus has the one task, the Minotaur, after which he comes back and has the sail debacle, which results with Aegeus dying. And so the throne is just ready for him to inherit. Here, Romulus has to prove his worth, and we're left with the Shakespearean telling of two stars keeping our motion in a single sphere, which you have, I think that's uttered by Prince Hal in Henry IV, Part 1, when he has to battle with, I forget the name now, it's in the Battle of Shrewsbury, the great pretender, Harry Hotspur. That's the name, Harry Hotspur. So Remus here is the Hotspur. Romulus is Prince Hal, who's going on to become Henry V. Overall, I think I noticed it was quite quickly dealt with by Plutarch. So I don't know if he thought maybe the death of Remus was dubious. But by the 21st of April, that's the month that the Romans celebrate the founding of Rome, built by Romulus. And I noticed that because I was thinking about dates. Carlyle talks about the importance of the celebration of dates in a revolution. or in the consecration of something new. That on the 21st of April, we still know this date of when Romulus founded Rome. So I think it was quite important. Here we have a painting of Romulus founding Rome. Whoops. And let's not go to the rape of the Sabines too quickly. City now being built, there existed all that were of age to bear arms into the military companies. Again, think of when Theseus was released by Minos. He didn't take his word for him, immediately began cultivating the army. Here Romulus does the same once Rome is founded. Doesn't rest on his laurels. Sort of Machiavellian mistrust of mercenary, I think, came in when he wanted to found his own military company and not rely on others. The wall then gave the companies a home and a sacred place. So the building of the city, the consecration of the walls, gives the people who are going to work under you a place to be their own and a place called sacred and worth defending. So that was an interesting call out. He's not just going to hire mercenary army. He wanted to build his own place, the importance of consecrating your own place. Then we get to the stealing of the women, the rape of the Sabines. Like Theseus with Ariadne and Antiope, there's sort of the subjection of women here is unsure. It's a bit vague. By the rape of the Sabines, it was necessary show of strength to Romulus and his environs. You know, the landscape in which he operates is one in which you need to prove your worth by going in. The rape also, it means full-on abduction. It means, think about carrying your wife across the threshold. That custom, which still existed late into you could say so, it still exists, though I can see other people would be calling it problematic at this point. But this is the sort of origin of that. But it's more mixed with physical strength and the showing of strength. If you cannot even hold your own women, then you are not even worthy of them, is a sort of linkage that Romulus is trying to show to the male Sabines. So the great man is always cute to his landscape, what he needs to do. Romulus is in a rough landscape that needs to come out of darkness, so he needs to show his strength by something like this act. Whereas, I don't know, some of the later heroes you'd see, certainly, maybe not in Plutarch, but when you get past antiquity, I don't think greatness diminishes just because people no longer do this, but actually what is in the greatness is the acuteness to your own landscape and what you need to do in accordance with the landscape you find yourself in. It's also, as we said, the creation of the date, 21st of April, lasted when Romulus founded Rome, but also here he created great nuptial traditions. And also in the eyes of Plutarch, I think he's liking the link between Theseus. Because Theseus was known as a great taker of women. Early battles for Romulus include he battled Acron, king of the Canaanenses, and Romulus vows to Jupiter to dedicate his vanquishes and armor to him if he wins. Again, the supplication to the gods. Theseus had Apollo, and here Romulus has Jupiter. Indeed, there was nothing did more advance, says Plutarch, the greatness of Rome than that she did always unite and incorporate those whom she conquered into herself. So again, the greatness is linked to imperial strategy, which I think is it's such a classic one of antiquity, that the greatness needs to be linked with your idea of an empire, or in Theseus's case, he founded the Commonwealth. But there's still that incorporation of further destinations into your domain. He does not build Rome and then satisfied with that and defends that. Yes, he makes it a place of sacred honor for his guardsmen to be in, but there is always an imperial strategy with greatness. It wants to test the horizon of the map. The defeat of Acron then is the origin of the Roman triumph as well. So Romulus is founding all these traditions: nuptial tradition with the rape of the Sabines, the triumph tradition. He has the date of the festival of the founding of Rome. All of this lends itself into the mythos of greatness. Are you having dates? Are there actual cultures and customs? It's not just the worship of a man, but are there living cultures and customs that people can associate to the lives of these people? think of in Plutarch's time, they were still going to that tomb of Theseus, whether it was weird that slaves were going worshipping this tomb of Theseus. It almost doesn't matter. At least there was a worship. There was some sort of performance happening in lieu of this man, this greatness. He has to deal with old betrayals and grudges by the Sabines as well, even after he has conquered Canaanenses. Romulus again prays to Jupiter for aid. In this one, I noticed procession of the triumph. We talked about statues of Romulus in triumph are and maybe seen in Rome in Plutarch's time. He still talks about that. So then he has a battle with the Sabines, and this is where we get to the women as peacemakers role, which is an interesting turn. Romulus again prays to Jupiter for aid. The battle of the Sabines was the site of the temple of Jupiter Stator. So again, there's a physical temple, a physical place of worship on a battle of a site. Women are eventually peacemakers and reconcilers. There's an interesting point here about the rape of the women in general and how it should be seen in antiquity, in the light of antiquity. Quote from the women: "You did not come to vindicate our honor." Again, a man needs to give valor. Carlyle talked about in his lecture on Odin that one of the most important things Odin instilled on the Norsemen was this sense of valor. So you did not come to vindicate our honor, said the women to the men of the Sabines, while we were virgins against our assailants. So they lost the original battle. But do come now to force us away as wives from their husbands and mothers from their children. And there's an interesting distinction to be had here between the virgin and then the wife. You can't, to go and abduct or have the rape of the Sabine women as virgins was a taking of something to create something, i.e. family. When the Sabine men then want to come and take them back, they are wives and settled children. And so it's seen in a different light in antiquity. So you've got to get yourself into that frame of reference. The virgin sort of is fair game, but you can't have the promiscuous part of marriage because that destabilizes the family structure. The Sabines then begin to, after the reconciliation, the Sabines begin to adopt the Roman months. Either Romulus or Numa first consecrated the holy fire and instituted holy vigils to keep. Interesting development. Here was an institution which best directed the attention of young women. This idea of the holy fire, and you can go and worship them, and you worship the acts done by these women. Here's Jacques-Louis David's painting, for example. So what about the final bits on Romulus? As Plutarch calls him, he has to deal with plague, he has to deal with the Camertines invading, thinking them unable to resist. Romulus gains victory. He took about half the population to Rome from the Camertines and needs to incorporate these. So you're left with the trouble of imperial incorporation. Romulus put government into the courts upon the death of his grandfather, Minotaur and Alba. So then Minotaur dies, and so he sort of finally naturally inherits Alba. That comes way later than the Theseus telling, when it sort of falls upon Theseus on his return from the Minotaur. Again, there's a sort of vague disappearance and death to Romulus, which can give him the apotheosis, which is important to all myths. Really, you need this apotheosis where you get merged with the gods. Here he is arriving on Olympia by Jean-Baptiste Nattier. Plutarch, in his panderings of Romulus's fate, does quote Pindar. It sort of disappears. Yeah, it disappears in these marshes or something. The uncertain death, scope for apotheosis. That's an important part of myth, greatness in myth telling. All human bodies, says Pindar then in the quote, yield to death's decree. The soul survives to all eternity. Some say Romulus' surname then becomes Quirinus, which is equivalent to Mars, that he sort of melded into Mars. So really, Theseus of his own motion, as a wrap-up, affected the action. Romulus is more compelled by events, I found, more so than by necessity. It could have, that becomes from his more humble beginnings, right? Raised by wolves. Neither properly lived up to the standard of a king. despite being governors. And I think that's important. Very primitive beginning for them. They make something from 0 to 1, but they're not really in the line of kingship. We might get to that later. That's it for Plutarch's Theseus and Romulus. Till next time, guys.